Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of That's Hockey Talk. I'm your host, Nick. I'm joined here by AQ Shipley. AQ, you're looking fantastic. You got the Remington Trophy in the background. No big deal. Just trying to show that off a little bit. Good for you, bud.
Yeah, man. I'm just trying to get a nice little background here. I think it looks all right today.
I do too. You look good. Hopefully this is up on YouTube, so you can go check us out there too whenever that gets published. I know Billy YouTube's has got some work to do back there. But let's talk about last night. The GOAT, the best, the captain, the kid. He was back in a big way. 4-point night for Crosby. Scored a goal, backhander, obviously. You knew he would. And then 3 assists with that beautiful one behind the net, banking the pass off the back of the net to himself, circles out, hits Dominic Simone, and Simone scores a goal, which in itself is miracle work by Crosby.
Yeah, I was losing my mind when that happened. The whole little spinorama, banked to himself off the back of the net, pass through people, goal by Simone. I was losing my mind. I think my wife wanted to admit me to a hospital last night, but we're doing things. The Penguins are back. They got a nice little juice added to the mix last night, and yeah, let's keep this thing rolling.
4th in the NHL, man. Who would have thought? With all the injuries they had, and even with the roster itself, it didn't look as strong as it had in recent years. They had some question marks in Galchenyuk and Cahoon and whatnot with the trades and getting rid of Phil Kessel. And here they are, sitting strong. Mike Sullivan, got to be in the conversation for Coach of the Year. Jari, as we talked about last week, just kind of out of nowhere. Pens look good. One thing I do want to talk about last night, too, was Minnesota. That's the Minnesota fans tweeting last night about how bad the Wild looked and how bad they've looked recently. And I sat there and I laughed to myself because after one of the goals, Ryan Sutter just absolutely demolished someone in front of the net. It might have been Hornquist and pushed him. And I thought to myself, like, do you think those guys lay their head down at night, Suter and Parise especially, and think they could have signed with Pittsburgh and potentially won cups, but instead they take the money and they go to Minnesota, which I understand they have ties there, but they take what was it, $90 million or something absurd at the time and go there. Do you think they have any regrets about that? Because Minnesota's just mirrored in mediocrity.
I think there's 2 types of players in any professional sports. There's the guys that chase rings or cups or whatever you want to call your championship of that sport, and there's guys that chase the money. Those guys obviously went for the money, and I can say this full-heartedly that when you're losing games, it is so much harder to go to work. When you're winning games, you could play a bad game, but it is so much nicer to go to work. It is such a better atmosphere. And what we're looking at with those guys is obviously they're going to live great lives. They're going to retire. They're going to play as long as they can, obviously, and fulfill their dreams of playing in the National Hockey League as long as they can. But financially, they'll be set. But they're never going to win a championship in Minnesota, and that's what they have to live with.
I said this to a few fans last night. It's just like the Wild have just been good enough over the years to never get a high enough draft pick, or when they haven't hit on the superstar type of player that you need to win those championships. They've always just had guys who are good enough, and they've never been bad enough to tank, which I understand. But like the state of Minnesota, they love hockey. They sell that place out nonstop, even when the team's not great. Like continued fan support. They're due. I feel like they're due. They need someone, and I honestly feel bad for the fans there.
Yeah, it's obviously a tough situation. Hopefully Billy Guerin can get that ship righted. I think, it's funny, though. It's like you look around the league, it's like they better start winning or their coach is going to get fired, because if you're out of the playoffs, they just fire coaches anymore. That's the way they do things now.
Yeah, coaches firing left and right, GMs dropping left and right. We're going to talk about that a little bit later with NRD. He's calling in. The other thing I want to talk about, someone else, tough night for Brad Marchand earlier this week, whiffing on the shootout attempt. After Boston blows a 5-2 lead, lets Philly back into the game. They get into the shootout. Marchand's up, and we know Boston struggled in overtime this year. We know they struggled in shootouts, and that was just the icing on the cake. Absolutely brutal. Cost his team the game. Looked like an absolute buffoon, embarrassing his team, his city, himself. Boston, what's going on with the shootouts in OT? I don't understand it. That team is so good.
Yeah, I don't get it either. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, that is going to be up there with one of the biggest sports bloopers maybe in the history of all sports, right? I mean, that is going to be replayed forever and ever and ever and ever. I mean, that is for as good of a hockey player as Brad Marchand is, to see him blow something like that in a game tying situation or to keep things alive, obviously in a shootout, it's absolutely mind blowing to see.
And then he chirped the guy online afterwards, which I thought was hilarious. Like, he told the guy, you dream about me and being me in your backyard, bud, which I get, because he probably had to let off some frustration because that was brutal. He was everywhere. It was viral. It was on SportsCenter. It takes a lot for a hockey play to get on SportsCenter, and that was one you don't want on there. I felt bad for him for once because I did put him on the underrated players list last week, underappreciated guys, and then he goes on to something like that. What an asshole.
It's just absolute karma on his part. What an asshole.
Now, on the opposite end, another play made it on SportsCenter's top 10, actually. Filip Forsberg's goal last night. Did you see that? The infamous Michigan goal, Lacrosse goal, the Svechnikov, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, it's so funny, the skill level of these guys, and that's what I've always admired about hockey players is they do things on skates that most people can't do, just normally in tennis shoes, right? I mean, it's just walking. I mean, it's unbelievable, the skill level of these guys, and to be able to be flying as fast as he was behind the net, scoop it and put it in the net like that. I mean, it's unbelievable to watch.
What do you call that? Do you call it the Michigan goal? Do you call it the Lacrosse goal? Do you call it the Svechnikov? Do you care?
I'll call it the Lacrosse goal. I don't really acknowledge Michigan. They were my big rival in college. I will never acknowledge that team. I'm like Ohio State. I call them that team up north.
I respect that. I am going to call it the Michigan goal just because that's the goal I saw on replay forever growing up. And Lacrosse, I don't know, it's whatever. I mean, it makes sense. But I personally don't care. I also don't care. There's like a big part of hockey Twitter that's very upset and arguing with each other over it. It's like, who the fuck cares?
It's a great goal.
It is. It's beautiful.
It's a great goal, period.
Further to
All
your
people
point.
They give a shit about a name.
Further to your point about how much skill we're seeing in the game right now, I have a theory about this. It's because they've cleaned up a lot of the goonery. And it's because back in the day, guys wouldn't even have attempted that goal because had they done it or even come close to doing it, they would have got steamrolled behind their own net by some jerk on the other team who shouldn't even been out there, but his only purpose was to take someone's head off. And because we've kind of got rid of those guys and moved towards a more skilled game, you're starting to see more highlights like that, which I think is always good because you're going to attract the casual fan and maybe turn them into a lifer. What do you think here? I feel like you're going to go the opposite way on this.
How do you know me so well? I mean, it's such an interesting debate. I mean, obviously, I love the skill level and where the game has gone in the NHL, but there's a part of me that likes the guys that just are the enforcers. They hop over the boards and they're just there to just beat people up. And I love those people. It brings me closer to the game that I play for a living. So I miss those types of guys. I love seeing the fights. I think fighting's obviously been a huge part of hockey over time, but you're right. I mean, the skill of those guys, there was none. They were good enough to skate on ice and beat people up while standing on skates on ice. And we've obviously moved a little further towards the skill direction.
Yeah, and did you see the Kassian Tkachuk incident from earlier this week where Matthew Tkachuk basically he ran Kassian like 3 times, which was ballsy enough as it is because Kassian's a big dude, and we saw how big he was after the 3rd time I believe it was he got hit, and he just ragdolled Tkachuk all over the ice.
Yeah, that was definitely impressive on Kassian's part. There's no question about it. I think what was even less impressive was the fact that Tkachuk went into a full fetal position and wanted no parts of that.
Am I not turtly enough for the Turtle Club? He was so effective though because like he throws those hits right, and the one hit that he actually hit Kassian with that caused the fight, I didn't think was that bad. Right. The first one I thought was much more egregious. He hit him right in the head, and that was the hit they're trying to get out of the game. And I'm surprised nothing happened there. But so he hits Kassian. Kassian reacts violently, ragdolls him over the ice, takes a penalty. Then the Flames score on the power play and win the game. So Tkachuk played his role perfectly there. Say what you want about it. That's what he is. That's what he does. He played it perfect to a T. And then Kassian gets a 2-game suspension. So props to the Battle of Alberta because people probably haven't been paying enough attention to these two teams recently because they haven't been super great. The Flames had a good run last year. But now it's like, okay, Calgary and Edmonton are back at it. They're both in the hunt in that division. And they hate each other again, which is good news because Western Canada, it's hard for us East Coasters, well, myself and the rest of us East Coasters, to pay attention.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fun to watch. I mean, I think Edmonton made the right move, getting a new GM in there and, obviously getting some pieces of the puzzle. I think adding James Neal was absolutely huge for them.
Yeah, what a turnaround.
I mean, unbelievable turnaround. I mean, he had a horrible season last year. I think he had less than 10 goals, and then all of a sudden, I think he had 10 goals in the first 2 weeks of the season this year. It was unbelievable. So, getting him, obviously, the two-headed monster with Draisaitl and McDavid has been more than impressive, and it's going to be exciting to see them playing good hockey again this year.
Here's another question for you on the Kassian thing. How mad do you have to be as an athlete to call another guy a pussy in the media? Like, just straight up in the media, it was like, yeah, he's a pussy.
Yeah, anytime you take anything into the media, it's you are fucking mad. Like there is
didn't dance around it. Was like, no, fuck him, he's a pussy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just anytime you say anything about anybody in the media, I think it's a bad thing. And then to actually call somebody a pussy or call somebody a name or actually like attack somebody's character, I guess, in terms of the sport. I mean, you were just over that guy, and you were looking to fight him every chance you get from this point forward.
Tkachuk, man, he pisses people off. One more thing on the skill note while we're talking about skill, big emphasis on skill. Jonathan Huberdeau down in Florida, probably another guy who we should have talked about as an underappreciated player, is now the all-time leading scorer for the Florida Panthers, which is incredible to me because I feel like it was only a few years ago he was drafted, and then you haven't really heard much about him. But if you look, he's up there in the points race. He's consistent. He's solid. When he's healthy, he's a stud. He's a playmaker. He can still score. He is now the all-time leading scorer for the Florida Panthers. And then when you look at what they had before was Olli Jokinen, who was the captain for a while when the team was very bad. He was always the lone bright spot on the team. And I don't know if you saw this, but I know Whitney was talking about it on Spit and Chicklets, and a tweet went out showing the display case that Florida had set up for Olli Jokinen as their all-time leading scorer, and it was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. It was just a jersey wrinkled up, hanging in the display case with two plaques, an old helmet, and an old magazine cover. It's like, come on, man. Have some pride in your franchise.
Yeah, I think looking around my office right now, I think I've put together a better display case for my career,
Without
and I'm nowhere
doubt.
near an all-time leader in any category.
Maybe get a case for the Remington, though.
Yeah,
Maybe get a
pretty
nice
interesting
shadow box for that Remington, though. It looks a little lonely on the counter.
It is. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I got it just sitting on a counter. I got helmets just laying on the floor and a good jersey. But it looks better than the little slide case that they put together from Michael's Crafts.
All right, we got to get into it. Let's get to the phone. We're going to talk to NRD, NHL Rumors Daily. He's got some scoop and some news on Ray Shero getting fired, and also the shocking news that Gerard Gallant, coach of the Las Vegas Knights, got the axe today. Joining us now on the phone, a mystery man. We don't know his name. We don't know anything about him. All we know is he has some incredible sources on the internet, and he runs a Twitter account, NHL Rumors Daily. Ladies and gentlemen, NRD is back.
It's an absolute pleasure to be with you guys again. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Hey, thanks for joining us, pal. We want to talk about some breaking news today. Gerard Gallant, coach of the Vegas Golden Knights, gets the axe. He was the first coach in franchise history, obviously, Jack Adams Award winner for the best coach in the league his first year on the job. In his career, he's lost in the Stanley Cup Finals, and he lost in the first round last year in the playoffs to the San Jose Sharks in that unbelievable Game 7 meltdown with that blown call for the 5-minute major on Pavelski. This year, the Knights were sitting tied at 54 points in the Western Conference, good for the tie for the last wild card spot with Winnipeg and Vancouver. Then he gets the axe. I don't know why. No one really knows why. Maybe you can shed some light on this for us. I suspect it was a call from ownership because I don't believe GM Kelly McCrimmon or the president there, George McPhee's standards raised that high overnight. The team was doing all right, not great, but in my mind, that's not enough to fire the coach.
No, I agree completely. You're 4-6 in your last 10. You're a team that's tied with a couple of other teams with 53 points for a playoff spot. You're out of it right now because the other team's got games in hand, but it came as a shock to many people. I know my limitations. I know how I'm good, but I know my limitations, and I know some of the bigger guys. Like when you have guys like Bob McKenzie, Darren Dreger saying this is a shock to them, you know it's a real shock. And I think that part of it is to kind of combat what you just said. I think Kelly McCrimmon wants his own guy in there. And I think DeBoer, how poetic is it that Gallant gets fired for DeBoer, a guy with the San Jose Sharks organization, that big rivalry there with Vegas. I think it came as a shock, but I do think there's some truth to McCrimmon wanting to get his own guy. McCrimmon was given the keys last year to the Kingdom in Vegas, and I think they want to move forward. I don't know if they saw Gallant as a 5-10 year down the road guy, which is as surprising as it is to say, I know. but that's the gist of what I got from some people I spoke to today.
Well, that kind of makes sense in that regard because he's only lasted 3 to 4 years everywhere he's been, which in my mind is the optimal shelf life for a coach. I don't think, unless you have an elite NHL coach, I don't think you should keep any coach in that league for more than 5 years max. They seem to run through their shelf life very quickly. I will say this, though. It was shocking for sure because of how good the team has been. But if you're going to do it, now I think is the right time to do it because there's still a lot of time left and they're within reach of the division. The real sting in the situation was that Gallant was supposed to coach in the All-Star game next weekend, but screw that. That's out the window now. Is DeBoer the right guy? We know with his situation when he went to New Jersey and then going to San Jose, both times in his first year as coach of those organizations, he got them to the Stanley Cup Finals. Granted, they lost, but that was quite a huge jump for them to take.
DeBoer's the right guy. DeBoer reminds me a lot of one of his compadres, Alain Vigneault in Philly, where everywhere he goes, he has success. And, he hasn't gotten the big prize. He hasn't won the Stanley Cup, but he has sustained success. And I think he's a guy that's going to come in immediately and change the culture of that Vegas team, be a little bit more disciplined. I know that Gallant is always viewed as a player's coach and that he's very close with the players. And I think DeBoer, not to say anything bad about DeBoer, I don't know him personally, but I think he's going to be a coach that comes in and brings back some discipline and some structure to that Vegas team who's been flying high, like you said, Stanley Cup Finals, their first season in the league. Last year, they have a great playoff run that gets cut short by a horrible penalty call. I think DeBoer's going to be the guy that brings some structure and discipline to that team. Not that they really need it, but I think he's going to be good in that, right? And I think I'm very interested to see how this plays out for the rest of the season.
AQ, what do you got?
Yeah, so this never happens, obviously, in my sport. NRD, I just want to ask you, what is the deal, one, with all the early season firings, and then in our sport, it's an early season firing or a mid-season firing, and then you have an interim coach, right? But I've never seen so many situations where we fire a guy and then immediately bring in another guy who was just a head coach or just got fired from another team. So what is the deal with all that right now?
Well, I'll give you an analogy from your sport, AQ. I know that Kelly McCrimmon said that this all came together in the last 24 hours. They haven't spoken to DeBoer. I'm throwing the red challenge flag on that one. I really doubt. I mean, I haven't heard anything concrete on my end yet, but I'm finding a hard time believing that you go from Gallant to talking to DeBoer to getting him the job all in the 24-hour period. I'm finding a hard time to believe that. As far as all the in-season firings and the early season firings this year, I think there's a lot. I think more than ever in the National Hockey League, there's a big discrepancy between the really good teams and the really bad teams, and there's not too many fringe teams. So I think that there's an urgency from owners and general managers that if you slip into that fringe, there's very little margin for error, and you're going to go all in on a good team and you're going to cut your losses on a bad team. And I think that more so ever than this season, especially with everything that came out about Bill Peters at the Flames, and I'm not saying that happens with Gerard Gallant here or Laviolette in Nashville for that matter. I just think there's teams that are starting to feel this sudden urgency to get ahead of the eight ball and cut their losses now as opposed to going through a whole season with a guy knowing that he's not going to get you the Stanley Cup. I really do think it's part of it, the margin of error. You don't want to be in the middle of the pack. You either want to be a leader, or if you know you're not good and you have to go into a rebuild, you slip behind like the Rangers did a couple of years ago. What Detroit's about to do, I know Blashill obviously is on the hot seat. I've heard a lot of things about Stevie Y. Just giving him the year, I don't think it really solves anything by firing him now. You know that's a talentless team. Not talentless, but
they stink. He's gone at the end of the year. They stink. We know it. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And I hate to say a team stinks because you know what? You got 23 guys that made it to the National Hockey League, made it farther than any of us ever have.
Oh, no
except
doubt.
for UAQ. But I think that
relatively
Detroit,
speaking, they stink.
Relatively speaking, but I think Detroit is going to give Blashill the rest of the year. Maybe not. I know I've heard some things about New Jersey and Detroit finding now that they might need to make a decision sooner than later. There's a lot of coaching talent on the market. I mean, there's the old saying that there's going to be 32 head coaching jobs in the NHL, and there's only 34 qualified head coaches. And I think that can be true in the New Jersey and Detroit situation with Laviolette and Gallant out there. I wonder if that pushes those teams along maybe to make a decision sooner than they once thought, because you don't want to let a chance like that slip away. Gerard Gallant, Peter Laviolette, great head coaches.
Yeah, if I was New Jersey, I'd pounce on either of those guys immediately. I think they could use it. And that's what we originally brought you on the show to talk about. We weren't expecting the breaking Vegas news, but New Jersey earlier this week fires GM Ray Shero, former Pens GM Ray Shero, after he fired the head coach, what was it, not even about 2 weeks ago. What were you hearing about what's going on in New Jersey? Because that was kind of a shock to everyone as well.
Yeah, New Jersey's been an interesting case this year. There's been a lot of movement. I mean, you fire John Hines, you trade Taylor Hall. You have PK Subban, Wayne Simmons, a great group of vets there, and you just severely, severely disappoint. And I know it's hard for the fans. I hear it a lot on my Twitter feed. I get a lot of mentions from the New Jersey Devils fans asking me what is going on with New Jersey. And I think that there's a lack of direction with where the Devils want to go right now. And I think that led to the firing of Ray Shero. From what I've heard, that the Hall trade, they weren't upset about the Hall trade. I mean, they did well. They got Kevin Ball, who's a great defenseman prospect. They got a first-round pick. I mean, they did as well as they could have. But I think there were more questions about how Ray Shero handled that situation. He didn't allow Hall or his agent to talk to teams that were interested in him. And that's pretty interesting considering that you have a guy that clearly wasn't going to be in New Jersey long-term. We thought he was. We thought that all the off-season moves that they made were going to push him over the edge to stay. They severely disappointed in the first half of the season. So now you know he's out. You don't allow his agent to talk to any team. So you're kind of hurting yourself on the return. That's a lot like what happened with Jacob Trouba this past summer, where Kevin Cheveldayoff didn't allow Trouba's agent to talk extension with the Rangers or the Red Wings or any other team that was interested in him. I think they did well in the Hall return considering, but I think because of that, there were questions starting to pop up in New Jersey about this lack of direction of where the team really wants to go. Do we want to blow this up and rebuild again? But it's hard to do because you have a bunch of vets there. You have guys like Wayne Simmons, Sami Vatanen, PK Subban. You have guys that can win you a playoff series now, no doubt. And I think that because of that, I think the Devils had some conflicting opinions in the room, their board of governors, their team president, and their ownership group. And I think they thought that the best way to move forward is to get a fresh face in there. I know Ray Shero, fantastic GM, surefire Hall of Famer, if he's not already. My mind's drawn blank on that. But I think that going forward, the Devils' best move was to, once again, I come back to this statement a lot because that's what's happening here in the league, cut their losses with Ray Shero. He kind of ran out his course, went a little stale like he did towards the end with the Penguins when they lost in that second round to the Rangers, and then they let go. I think Shero's great, and he brings in some great players. He brings in great talent, but if you don't get the job done with him rather quickly, I think that he doesn't really know how to enter a rebuild as some new GM, some fresh faces do, like John Chayka in Arizona or Kyle Dubas with the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It's not like he didn't have pieces, though. He gets the first overall pick. They get Nico Hischier, who's good, not great so far, but, you know, it is what it is. AQ, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real interesting thing with New Jersey. I think, have they named an interim? Or like who's running the GM department right now?
Tom Fitzgerald, who was their assistant general manager and also an interim assistant coach before Hines got fired. They put him out there to babysit John Hines right before they let him go. He's going to be the interim GM. Martin Brodeur, longtime Devils goalie and legend, is an advisor to the general manager. There was a lot of talk about him possibly being a pretty good candidate to get that job. He had some experience under Doug Armstrong with the St. Louis Blues over the course of his executive career a couple of years ago. So I think he has a pretty good shot at it. And that would be interesting. You know, it's always a fan favorite to bring in a name like Martin Brodeur to run the show. Yeah, but right now, Tom Fitzgerald's in charge. I think that the Devils are going to enter a little bit of a sell-off at the deadline, rightfully so. There's a lot of rumors about PK Subban. I know I'll be back on. I'm sure we'll address that for the trade deadline special. But right now, I can tell you this. There's a lot of talk about PK Subban. He hasn't requested a trade. It's not to say the Devils might not look to see if there's any teams out there that will take that full $9 million that he's owed. But I think that he doesn't mind being in New Jersey. I'm looking at more guys like Sami Vatanen and Wayne Simmons, veterans that are on cheap deals, possibly expiring. I know Vatanen and Simmons are on expiring deals. I think those are good rentals for teams to pick up. I'd watch Vegas. I know they're heavily looking for a defenseman, especially for Sami Vatanen. I'd watch Vegas in that hunt.
Yeah, Brodeur would make sense because that kind of follows the trend we've seen recently. Colorado with Sakic, Detroit bringing Eisman back from Tampa Bay, the Bruins with Sweeney, hiring these former players to come in and kind of clean up the organization, and it's worked for a lot of these teams, so I would not be surprised to see that. Okay, what else do you got for us rumor-wise? I know you've been dying to spread some information to tell everybody. I know you got some sources. What do you got?
Yeah, I got some things on the New York Rangers. I know Alexander Georgiev is the hot name right now, as well as Chris Kreider. There's a lot of rumors surrounding their availability at the deadline. As far as I can tell you with the Rangers goaltending situation right now, they're going to ride all three. There's no offer on the table that has really piqued their interest, and rightfully so. I mean, you have two goalies under the age of 25 that are potential starters in the National Hockey League, which are very rare to find. And with a guy like Henrik Lundqvist on his, he's got a year left in addition to this season, turning 38 soon. It's hard to get rid of a 23-year-old goaltender, even if you have the Crown Prince and Igor Shesterkin waiting in the wings. It's hard to get rid of a 23-year-old goalie who has potential to start in this league. And I think that nothing on the table yet has piqued their interest, but San Jose, who's looking for a goalie, is involved. Ottawa, who could even ship out Craig Anderson and then bring in Georgiev to get younger at that position, as well as Toronto Maple Leafs, who are looking to strengthen their goaltender depth for a playoff run. Those are the three teams I'm looking at for Georgiev. As far as Chris Kreider, Colorado, big player, Boston, big player. Those are two teams that are really looking to strengthen their forward depth for the playoff run. I know Colorado is extremely interested in Chris Kreider. I know Adrian Dater, of the formerly of the Denver Post, I think he's with Colorado Hockey now. He's been talking about that as well. I'd watch Colorado there. Boston, Elliot Friedman mentioned the other day that they kind of have Tyler Toffoli in their back pocket. I don't know if that's the choice words that Boston really would have liked to have out there. I've definitely been all over that. Going back to last February, Boston was extremely close to acquiring Tyler Toffoli last year at the trade deadline. And this year they're back in it again. And I think that they can get that deal done tomorrow if they really wanted to. But I think they're going to try for Chris Kreider as well. The price for Kreider right now is a little high, and teams are waiting to see if that comes down.
Makes sense. Kreider's a guy I could see going to any team and instantly improving them. That speed and size you can't really find in the league anymore. AQ, you got anything else for NRD?
Yeah, what teams? So coming up on the deadline, what teams do you see? Obviously, we saw Columbus make big splashes last year at the deadline. Which team do you see as major players? Whether it's a major contender getting that one extra piece to send them over the edge, or teams that are kind of fringe to give them that piece to kind of help them make a run moving forward.
I think that there's a couple of teams that are pushed right up against the cap that would like to make moves. Out in the Desert Bayou, Arizona's one of them. They're really pushed for cap space, and even with Taylor Hall there, they're even more close to the edge. But I think they wouldn't mind bringing in a depth defenseman, maybe a seventh D-man to round out that core. They're already set in net. Andy Randa, Ivan Provatsev, they have good goalies there. I think they could use a depth defenseman to push them over the edge. It's always about playoff time gearing up. The Penguins are definitely looking for a forward. They're going to make a move too. A lot of talk about Alex Galchenyuk being sold off. Right now with Jake Gensel out, I wonder if they hold on to Galchenyuk simply because they just need the depth and maybe he puts it together. But that won't stop teams from trying to buy low there. As for sellers, I think you're looking at teams like the Rangers, which is hard to really consider them a seller. I know team president John Davidson mentioned the other day, they're going to kind of be fluid. They're not going to necessarily be buyers or sellers. They're going to wait it out and see the process as it pertains to a playoff race.
They'd be stupid not
to sell. The Devils are sellers, heavy, and those are the teams that I kind of identify. Maybe I could see Vegas buying a little bit more than just a defenseman, because now that they got the coaching change, maybe they can add some depth to gear up again. They have a coach there that they obviously really like. We just spoke about Peter DeBoer, who they think that can get them over the edge. So I'd identify those teams as the big buyers and movers for the deadline.
All right, brother. Sounds good. Can't wait to see what happens there. We'll get you on again before the deadline to get some more information. I know you're linked in there. So thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate the info on Vegas and Devils, man. Thanks. Have a good one.
Thanks,
Thank
brother.
you, guys.
All right, what do you think? Kind of makes sense. I mean, the Vegas thing was shocking, but the more and more you look at it, I guess I understand where they're coming from. I don't necessarily agree with it, but like I said, I think if you're going to do it, now's the right time to do it. At least give your team time to acclimate to the new coach. And I mean, we've seen coach firings work before in the past. As Penguins fans, they've fucking motivated them to 2 cups.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, but that's been the one thing that I've had a hard time kind of understanding right now is, most of the time when you see it, for instance, when the Pen fired Bilesma, they bring up Sullivan, right? And
Yep.
he's already in their situation. He's the lower
Johnson,
level, whatever, the
Johnson.
Wilkes-Barre Scranton
But
coach, and boom, he gets elevated. And now, the thing that I think is so surprising, I think, with the moves they've made this year is now, you got John Hines, who gets fired from New Jersey, and then weeks later he's hired in Nashville, and then same thing here. DeBoer is fired, and I think it's the exact same time frame. I think I read earlier, 34 days to exactly. Wild. Both of them were hired by the next team, and it's like, they were just fired by a team, obviously, and both of them were fired from their teams for respective reasons, and now all of a sudden they're the right fit, and they're ready to come in from an outside organization and be the better fit for your organization. I don't understand it. I don't understand why they're just going interim and bringing from within and then figuring it out after the season. But obviously they know something that we don't.
Everybody does it differently, man. Something like the Blues did it last year with Craig Berube. He made him interim, and then he goes on to win the cup, and he becomes the guy. And you saw years ago, Barry Trotz wins a cup with Washington, and they just say, thanks, see you later. Go ahead to the Islanders. Go. We're not going to pay you. So everyone has their own flavor to it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Interested to see how this works out for the Golden Knights. So, all right, that's it for us. Thanks, everybody, for rocking with us. Wait, AQ, is there anything you want to talk about Penn State at all?
No, I don't. We'll
okay,
see what happens.
Just making sure. Just
we're
if you
good.
get anything off your chest or anything.
No, I'm good. I'm going to let this thing play out.
Smart. Okay. Plead the fifth. I got you. All right. And that's Hockey Talk.
That's Hockey Talk.
What is that, Sky Cam? Oh, you can't do it. Go back. That's what you were originally doing. Please, God. This is 100%.
That's too high. Hold on. We're close, dude. Just relax. We're close. Oh, this is the one. This is the one.
Hey, this is like when you do a box jump, so you gotta stack them up and you just hope you guess right so you can make it still.
Oh, this is going to be the
There
one.
it is.
This is going to be the one.
Oh my God, that's it. Yeah.
Holy shit, he did it.
Yes.